Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your sanctimoniously notorious Robert Meyer Burnett, also known as the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, your master of fun and wonder, your sci-fi sommelier, and of course, your existential Mr. Rogers. And welcome to Robservations, a show about something. This is Robservations, episode number whoa, as I take my headphones off, episode number 350. Can you believe we made it to 350? I find it astonishing, actually, that we're on episode 350, but it's all because of you. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. And once again, I'm coming at you from the Robservatory, Robcasting as it were. And if you don't find that amusing, if that doesn't just tickle your sense of whimsy, I don't know what I can do for you. But anyway, we are here. It is a Sunday. I'm very excited to celebrate Robservations, episode number 350 with you. You know, this is kind of a milestone episode, but I'm like, should I do something? Should I go on for 350 minutes like I went on for 300 minutes? Nah, I don't think so. I think we'll just celebrate every 100 episodes as being like another milestone of me being here with you. And it's very exciting to be here with you on this Sunday. And you know what? Right off the top, I have something I need to bring you, something I need to talk about, something I know you were waiting for. It refers back to another episode just last week where I talked about the new film, the new Austrian movie, The Trouble with Being Born. Something I said was probably going to be the most incendiary sci-fi film ever made. I don't know if that's true or not, but it played at the Berlinale. It was in Berlin, and I have a review that I wanted to share with you because I was waiting to hear what this movie was going to be like, and lo and behold, Variety has a review. Striking intellectualism and icy formalism vie with a viscerally upsetting premise in Sandra Wollner's deeply fraught sci-fi provocation. Right up my alley. I love any deeply fraught sci-fi provocations, especially movies like this one. Running time 93 minutes. It's a strange feeling to be among the earliest audiences, and who can tell just how many more such a disturbing, hard sell film will reach for a project destined for notoriety. But then Sandra Wollner's The Trouble with Being Born inspires nothing but strange feelings, from unnerving horror to shocked admiration to visceral disgust to that specific type of disorienting nausea that comes from the fractional delay between your eye processing a well-composed image and your brain comprehending the implications of the actions so coolly depicted. That gap is just one of the many conceptual fissures into which Wollner's desperately creepy, queasy, thought-provoking film gnaws. Image versus implication, human versus non-human, real versus unreal. If the trouble with being born lives anywhere, it is in a house in a forest on the deepest, most sunless lower slopes of the uncanny valley. Indecipherable, abstract, staticky images flicker and jiggle while a glitchy, digitized noise finally coalesces into a voice. It is a child's voice, occasionally edged with auto-tuned artificiality, recounting the memory of a childhood summer's day spent with Papa. We turn a corner in a wood and are suddenly beside a backyard pool and watching that day play out. The trigger warning, big enough to cover the plot details, let alone the themes here, has not yet been invented. Such a trigger would have to be more in the order of a firing pin on a mortar, or maybe the detonation code to a suitcase nuke. So proceed with caution. The child is not a child, but a robot called Ellie, played by 10-year-old Lena Watson, which is a pseudonym to protect the privacy of the underage actress who also wears a features-blurring plastic mask. Her machine nature we understand when Papa, Dominic Warda, finds her floating face down in the pool and reacts with a slightly resigned, not again, rather than with a panic before carrying Ellie back to the house and rebooting her via his phone. And soon we come to realize, in a dispassionately shot scene that accrue a sinking dread in the details of a touch that lingers too long or a kiss that cannot be interpreted as paternal, that the relationship between Ellie and Papa is sexual in nature. This example of techno-pedophilia comes to us with wires crossed and synapses shorting out in the attempt to understand its ramifications. Ellie is a machine which has no function other than that which it was designed. But if a machine has no agency or interiority, and therefore no concept of exploitation, where are the pre-programmed memories that comprise the voiceover coming from? Where are these thoughts being thought? Further, it is a machine in the shape of a young girl played by a young girl. The press notes assure us that every imaginable care was taken to ensure the actress's physical and psychological well-being. And the most upsetting scenes are subtly CG'd. But still, it is impossible to trick our brains into not seeing the final images, which are mostly graphic only in inference for what they appear to imply: the violation of a child. This is further complicated by the appearance later on of the real Ellie, an older girl who resembles the robot version and is presumably the source of the memories that the robot repeats. Even then, director Wollner and co-writer Roderick Warich are scarcely half done. New, naughty themes of gender identity, human fallibility, and the whispery presence of a ghost in every machine also develop. Robot Ellie wanders off into the forest, apparently following a disembodied voice, and becomes lost. She is picked up by a passing motorist who reacts with surprise, but not shock, when he sees she's an android, implying they're a fairly commonplace part of this seemingly near-future society, and he brings her back to his aging mother, Ingrid Burkhardt, and with a few quick adjustments turns Ellie into Emil, a replica of his mother's brother who died tragically young some 60 years previous. Ellie's new life as Emil is a flipped version of the old life, even beyond the gender change. First built to serve an older man's deviancy, now Emil is a surrogate for an old woman's near-lifelong grief. Even the cat from the previous forest house is supplanted by a dog in the suburban tower block apartment in which the old woman lives. But Emil's original programming proves difficult to dislodge, even as fragments of new memories, presumably those of the doomed real-life Emil, start to intrude and impinge on his reality in increasingly erratic ways. In terms of the visceral discomfort that Wollner and DP Tim Kroger can summon through the deployment of slow, starkly formalist, clinically precise shot-making, the director joins the pantheon of uncompromisingly intellectual Austrian formalists like Ulrich Seidel and Michael Haneke. It's no surprise that the sound designer Peter Kooten also takes a co-composer credit alongside David Schwartzhart, as it's hard to tell where the exceptional sonic landscape of clicks and burrs and Ellie Emil's synthesized voice stops and the uneasy electro-ambient atonal score begins. But in terms of daring, Wollner may even outstrip her countrymen. Her film's eerie, glassy service conceals deep cuts into ontology, memory, identity, and our increasing, boundary-obliterating relationship to technology. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as you all can probably guess, this movie goes to number one with the bullet for me. I love challenging science fiction, not necessarily spaceships and ray guns, but how does science fiction illuminate the world that we live in today? And we are woefully under-equipped right now to deal with many of the moral and ethical implications that technology that's rolling at us down a hill like a giant boulder that can be not stopped by anyone, we're just not ready. It's going to come at us anyway. But I think a movie like this, wow, yeesh, what subject matter. But we're here. You know, we're already here, whether they're real dolls or whatever kind of technology you're into. The relationship of human sexuality and technology is going to be something that we are going to be dealing with for a very, very long time. And it sounds to me like this movie is ground zero to begin this conversation. Honestly, I don't even know if this movie is going to be distributed in the United States. I don't know if it can be. But the questions about what are machines? And we're seeing it being dealt with across the board, Star Trek Picard is about that right now. Westworld Season 3 is certainly about that. Movies like Ex Machina are about that. And of course, we've seen Blade Runner and we've seen Battlestar Galactica, all the way back to Fritz Lang's masterpiece of science fiction of the silent era, 1927's Metropolis. I've talked about this a lot. This is a fascinating subject to me, and this movie brings it way too close to home, but I am fascinated. I mean, it sounds like they're going to be dealing with what Spielberg and Stanley Kubrick dealt with in AI, artificial intelligence. I'm very excited to see this movie and how it's handled. It sounds very haunting. And I don't know why this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with this movie, but just reading this review reminded me of Scarlett Johansson's film, the adaptation of Michael Faber's book, Under the Skin, which is one of the finest pieces of science fiction of the last decade. If you haven't seen that, Under the Skin is a very haunting film, and I highly recommend it. So what do you guys think? It's going to be quite interesting to see where this movie winds up. Yeah, I don't even know. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to also discuss, there was an article that was in Dark Horizons. And once again, Garth Franklin's Dark Horizons site. It's a site I go to. It's an aggregate site. Garth does a great job. I've been going to Dark Horizons for, it seems like, decades since it started. And it collects all of the movie news and genre-related material. And I always go there. And it was from today. He put this up there today, Sunday, March 1st. And he says, this is the article. Simon Pegg was being interviewed. The Star Trek franchise has always been about the shows, with the movies a supplemental part of the equation. While the franchise did yield some classic feature films like Wrath of Khan and solid entries like Undiscovered Country and First Contact, and I would like to add Star Trek the Motion Picture, the films always played second fiddle to the series. The result was an economical 10-film franchise with most entries made for tight budgets in the $20 to $40 million range, and most of the time yielded films that generated around $70 to $150 million in box office. That changed when J.J. Abrams came along in 2009 and rebooted the films, snagging much higher production budgets. $140 million for 209's film, $185 to $90 million for the sequels, and resulting in higher box office in the $335 to $467 million range. Well, I just want to point out in this article that means that the Star Trek movies were not that successful. Unfortunately for the money spent, the new films haven't made enough to be a major profit generator, something distributor Paramount Pictures is in desperate need of. The only option then to continue is to trim the budget considerably, something that won't happen according to actor Simon Pegg, who suggests the films are pretty much over because Paramount can't go back to making them cheaper. He told Games Radar, quote, "The fact is, Star Trek movies don't make Marvel money. They make maybe $500 million at the most, and to make one now on the scale they've set for themselves is a $200 million proposition. You have to make 3 times that to make a profit. I don't feel like the last one," which he, by the way, wrote, "they didn't really take advantage of the 50th anniversary. The regime at the time dropped the ball on the promo of the film, and we've lost momentum. I think losing Anton Yelchin was a huge blow to our little family, and our enthusiasm to do another one might have been affected by that, so I don't know. It certainly sounds as though the recent Abrams trilogy of films has come to an end, and so whatever comes next from the film side of the franchise will have to be quite different. Meanwhile, the TV side of the Trek franchise is going strong with Star Trek Picard, just over halfway through its airing first season and starting production on its second, while Star Trek Discovery wrapped its third season shoot recently. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is not surprising. Here's one of the things that I don't think gets talked about enough. For some reason, Star Trek was always, which under the original series, by the way, it was never a cheap show. People talk about, you've heard me rail against the fact that Star Trek the original series, which was aired between 1966 and 1969, was one of the more expensive shows on television. And at the time, it employed visual effects that were state of the art. The model of the Enterprise was quite large. They used green screen, well, at the time, blue screen technology, blue screen shooting, and it was very sophisticated. And if they were able to measure demographics, the ratings for Star Trek would have been quite good, because the people that watched the show were right in the sweet spot: college students, young adults that advertisers wanted to reach. But ratings were obviously different. They were looked at differently at the time, and Star Trek was never a number one highly rated show, unfortunately. But it's not that it was badly, it didn't have bad ratings, mostly middle of the road ratings, but it certainly wasn't a disaster. However, the show was canceled famously after 3 seasons. It almost was canceled after 2 seasons, but a letter writing campaign saved it. But when it came back for its 3rd season, it was given the Friday night death slot and aired on NBC at 10 p.m. when its target demographic, where its audience was out. Nobody was hanging out watching Star Trek at 10 o'clock on a Friday night. So unfortunately, it didn't survive beyond 3 seasons. During the Berman era, Rick Berman produced Star Trek. He produced 25 seasons, believe it or not. 25 seasons of Star Trek between 1987 and 2005. 25 seasons of Star Trek over 18 years, because obviously the series, some of them ran concurrently. Deep Space Nine ran concurrently for a season with Next Gen, then Voyager ran concurrently with Deep Space Nine, and then on to Enterprise. So it was interesting. But the thing that Rick Berman was able to do that he does not, I think, get enough credit for is he very economically produced modern Star Trek. Didn't go over budget for the season. If they wanted to spend more money on something like, whether it was Unification or The Best of Both Worlds, they would make it up by doing what are called bottle episodes, which means that they would shoot on their standing sets. Now, one of the things that you're supposed to have, a well-produced, I think, honestly, in my mind, in terms of thinking about it from a production standpoint, I think one of the best, if not the best produced science fiction show that has ever aired from a production standpoint on television is The Expanse. The way they use their sets, the way they use set extensions, and the way they don't use set extensions, they have been evocative. They're able to do a wonderful job making a very, very expansive show, jumping around from planet to planet, going into outer space. It is a very effectively produced show, and they really get a lot of bang for their buck, which, if you are to look at modern Star Trek, we know from the get-go, Star Trek, whether it's Discovery or Picard, are very expensive shows. And one of the things that I think has been a problem since J.J. Abrams took over Star Trek is that Star Trek, because of its audience, because it's never traveled well internationally, and because Star Trek is a niche franchise. Arguably, in 1994, when All Good Things aired, the last episode of Next Generation and Star Trek Generations got into theaters, where it brought Kirk and Picard together, 2 generations of Star Trek, and we also had Deep Space Nine on the air. That was probably the high point of Star Trek in its history, in franchise history. It was getting huge ratings and syndication. Everyone loved Star Trek back then, and the audience was changing. Imagination connoisseurs, we had a lot more of them in the world, and it was in that transitional period where women were flocking to science fiction and video games and anime, so the audience increased. There was always a female audience for Star Trek, but genre in general, more women were becoming imagination connoisseurs in the 90s than ever before, so there was a huge contingent of the female audience that was watching Star Trek. So Star Trek did really well, but under the Berman era, it was an incredibly well-produced show. It was not breaking the bank. And I think one of the things that has been problematic for Star Trek since 2009 is in their effort to try and, well, change Star Trek into something, I guess, more appealing to a general audience. Star Trek will always be a niche audience. They've been trying to turn it into Star Wars, but they have been unsuccessful. But the difference is, good Star Trek does not require lots of money. I mean, if you go back, let's just go back to Next Gen and think there are two, Next Gen and Deep Space Nine. There are two episodes that I always think about when I think about how should great Star Trek be produced, and that is the second season's Measure of a Man from TNG, and then the first season, the penultimate episode of the first season of Deep Space Nine, Duet. Both of those are great examples of bottle shows where you had incredible drama with no need for visual effects. One of the things that they've done with modern Star Trek, holographic displays, you're always looking out windows, the sets are big. So they're just, by the way the show is produced, it's very expensive. And they haven't learned, I think, they haven't learned yet how to effectively produce Star Trek for a budget. There's no reason why a Star Trek movie, I mean, you look at the Star Trek films that were made with the original cast, they were not expensive, as this article pointed out. They were between 20 million. I mean, Star Trek the Motion Picture was, at the time, everyone said, this is the most expensive movie ever made. I mean, the budget that was cited is $44 million back in the late 70s. But the thing about that is they had rolled all of the expenses. They had been trying to make a Star Trek movie in the 70s for a long time, and they've been spending money on them. Philip Kaufman, the director of The Right Stuff, the man who shared story credit on creating Indiana Jones on Raiders of the Lost Ark. He also directed The Wanderers and the superlative remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Henry and June, and The Unbearable Lightness of Being. A favorite director, and he made my beloved The Right Stuff. Philip Kaufman was originally going to direct a Star Trek movie called Planet of the Titans that was perhaps going to star Toshiro Mifune as a Klingon, and that's where actually the original version of the Star Trek Discovery was designed. That was Ken Adam, who was the production designer from the Bond films, and of course Ralph McQuarrie had done the illustrations of that enterprise. And that's where they got that idea. Brian Fuller brought back that design in to be used in Star Trek Discovery, which I thought was great. And then, of course, once he left, that Discovery design was radically redefined. The shape is there, the shadow is there, but the spinning primary hull, and it was changed. The warp nacelles. Anyway, so Star Trek must be made on a budget, and that requires deft storytellers and great producers who know how to do it. And remember, when the Star Trek films were made, Star Trek after Star Trek the Motion Picture, Star Trek 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they were able to reuse sets later on from Next Gen, and they were able to reutilize, they use stock footage, they use all kinds of things to keep costs down. And the way Star Trek is being produced now is it's a Tiffany show. You know, they're spending a lot of money, and they have overspent with the J.J. Abrams, the Kelvin-verse Star Trek movies, absolutely overspent in terms of how they were made. There's no reason that a Star Trek, I mean, here's what you do. You don't have holograms in every shot, for instance. You know, you can make a great Star Trek movie without spending all of this money. You don't have these elaborate effect sequences. You scale back. You know, you make, what is Star Trek best at? It's always about character and story. And you can get away with having compelling, you can have a compelling Star Trek story without spending a lot of money. You know, and they proved that. Look, Star Trek 4, which was at the time the second most successful Star Trek movie, really behind, well, in adjusted dollars. What was Star Trek 4? You went back and you had an epic time travel story where they went to San Francisco. They shot on location, which can obviously get expensive, but, you know, you're not breaking the bank with effects. I mean, that movie was all character and story. And I think they need to take a page out of, I mean, the ship has sailed with Picard, and the ship has sailed, like, I'll give you an example, for instance. In order, this episode, 2 weeks ago, where you saw a Romulan warbird. You know, they have this sequence where they have a classic Romulan warbird, like the one that was introduced in Balance of Terror in the first season of The Next Generation. You have a space battle. You don't even see the captain of the ship. You know, normally they would show you on a view screen, for instance. You could see the view screen where you met the captain, the warlord, whoever, the space pirate. They mention his name, but you never see him. Why have that battle in the first place? Oh, I know. So 7 of 9 could just show up and they could give you, they wanted a trailer moment, as my friend Darren Doctorman would say. My inglorious Trexpert friend Darren Doctorman, they have to put that in the trailer. Why? Even watching that episode, I'm like, I get it. You want to have an action sequence in that episode. So, hey, let's have a space battle. Not very effective. It really certainly didn't have anything to do with the story that was being told. You could have introduced 7 of 9 in a different way, but that's what Star Trek is. You would lose that space battle that was ultimately meaningless, just to give 7 of 9 an intro. Okay, she has a heroic introduction. She's a ranger just because. They'll always do that. I think effective producing of Star Trek is to not do that. I get it. You want to show a Romulan bird of prey, but why? You make that scene. It was a pretty lackluster space battle. It didn't really get us anywhere. We never learned who that character was. What you do is that's what you cut. You cut that episode. Spend more time on the planet. Spend more time with those characters. Tell us more about that villain that you introduced and get rid of in the same episode. And Star Trek has a problem. It has a producing problem. And we see it. We've seen it since Star Trek 09. Whenever they have an opportunity to throw things into a shot, whether it's, look, I appreciate the texture. I like seeing more aliens and all that. But you can make a Star Trek movie. A Star Trek movie doesn't have to cost $140 million. Make one for $100 million. What, you can't make a Star Trek movie for $100 million? Of course you can. What it requires is a filmmaker and a producing team that understands how to make a movie for $100 million or less. As a matter of fact, why not try and make a Star Trek movie for $75 million? I'm sure there's people that could do it. I know for a fact there are. You don't have to spend money on Star Trek movies the way that they're spending. So now they say, okay, the Kelvin franchise is dead. Can you imagine, though, if you made a Star Trek movie for, say, $50 million or $60 million? Heck, make a Deep Space Nine movie for that money. Advertise it. Keep your costs under $100 million total. I once wrote an article for Sci-Fi Universe magazine back in the 90s about why not write an independent, I called it Tarantino-esque. We have Tarantino wanting to do a Star Trek movie. I said almost 30 years ago, why not make a Tarantino-esque Deep Space Nine film and shoot it like an indie movie? Standing sets, never get off the station. You tell some compelling story. I don't know what that story is, but certainly when you look at shows like The Expanse, I am not aware of how much The Expanse costs per episode compared to Star Trek Discovery, but I'll bet you it costs a lot less than Star Trek Discovery, and they're getting a lot more bang for their buck because The Expanse is all about character. It's got great effects. It's got great expansive storytelling. But, Star Trek somebody needs to go try and make a Star Trek movie for a lot less than $200 million or $170 million. Because you can do it. It can be done. Where's the filmmakers that want to step up and make a Star Trek movie where you're focusing on character and plot? Cut half of your effects budget. I understand in something like Star Trek Into Darkness, let's have a sequence. Let's have an action scene where Kirk and Khan fly through space in spacesuits through a debris field or an asteroid field to get onto their opponent's ship. Cut that out. Why do you need that sequence? Oh, because it's going to be Star Trek doesn't need those kinds of action sequences. Those are superficial. They're ridiculous. You don't need that. It's not even that interesting. And what Star Trek needs is to spend less money. It just does. And when I read these articles, it's disheartening because here's Simon Pegg who says, yep, we're not going to make another one because it's too much money. Well, if you want to make another one, let's make one for less money. Why not? Anyway, I know. It's the 350th episode of the show, and I'm talking about Star Trek again. Go figure. What do you guys want to talk about? What is on your minds today? I'm not sure, so I'm going to look. Let's see. Well, Tim the Spider Monkey sent in a tip. He says, I mentioned the other day the 4-hour documentary In Search of Darkness, which is about 80s horror. Interviews include John Carpenter, Tom Atkins, Doug Bradley, Keith David, Larry Cohen, Jeffrey Combs, Joe Dante, Barbara Crampton, Stuart Gordon, Nick Castle, Kane Hodder, Sean Cunningham, Tom Holland, no, not Spider-Man kids, Lloyd Kaufman, Heather Langenkamp, Don Mancini, Bill Moseley, Greg Nicotero, Mark Schustrom, Brian Usna, and many more. If you can get a hold of it, you should. Well, Tim, that sounds great. That is definitely a murderer's row of 80s filmmaking talent. I'd love to do that. I'd love to get that. Dieter Bastian sends in a tip and says, Rob, you beat me to the punch. I saw Rambo for Life's new review for Free Enterprise. I knew the channel and wanted to inform you about it. Then I saw your comment. My only complaint was the running time. Kudos to you. Still no package in the mailbox. No, Mike Bodden has all these packages he means to send me. People have sent me a lot of stuff. I'm going to have another one of my unboxings when I get that. I haven't got it yet. So, yeah, for those of you who don't know, Rambo for Life's YouTube channel, he reviewed. It was a review for one of his Patreon members. He reviewed Free Enterprise, and it was a very positive review. I thank him for that. Always nice to see when your work is back in the news. So kudos and thank you, Rambo for Life. Curtis Mervyn Joseph sends in a tip and says, Dear Mr. Burnett, it's interesting that you've changed the format on the letter readings for your videos in Season 2. Curious? Can I, like others in the PGS community, read the letters on your website that don't make it on Robservations? Yes. If somebody sends me a letter and I don't read it on Robservations, it's just gotten to the point where I try and read them all, but it's just gotten to the point where I'm getting so many letters now that it's hard. But most, if not all, of our letters are on the website. So if I don't read your letter aloud, first of all, don't take it personally. And second of all, it's on the website, I'm sure, as long as it's not, offensive or somebody says to not put it on the website. Curtis Mervyn Jones also says, since I've never donated to you your live chats before, so now I have. Okay, well, Curtis, I very much appreciate that. Thank you for supporting the channel. That is great. Anonymous sends in a tip and says, has there been a street date yet announced for Second Sight's Dawn of the Dead? I can't seem to find a date, or am I blind? Okay, for those of you who don't know, George Romero's Dawn of the Dead is one of my favorite movies of all time. I have a Dawn of the Dead fetish. I've owned Dawn of the Dead. I think I've owned every single Laserdisc version of it, and I've owned just about every other DVD and Blu-ray version of it from around the world. It has never been released on 4K except in Italy, where they put out a big box set, and it was for those of you who don't know, there are 3 versions of George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. There is the the North American theatrical version. Then there is the European cut. That's a different cut of the movie that was overseen by Dario Argento. It has different scenes, well, not really different scenes, but different shots. It has more gore in it, and it has much more of Goblin's score. In the American version, in the theatrical cut, George Romero used a lot of stock library music and less of Goblin's. Goblin is the band that scored the movie. And then there is the director's cut. Now, all of these versions have been released before. I have a beautiful Japanese chrome Laserdisc box set for the film that has both the extended version, the director's cut, and the Argento version. And there have been the Italian box set, Nicholas Winding Refn supervised or paid for, or however he loaned his name to the 4K restoration of Argento's version. And that came out in a box set that also included on Blu-ray all 3 other versions of Dawn of the Dead. And then there is a Japanese box set, which I also have, that also comes in a chrome. It's sort of redolent of the Laserdisc. The Japanese box set has all 3 versions as well. But the thing is, no one has been granted access to the original negative elements. They're old transfers for various reasons, because Richard Rubinstein had an inflated sense of what the original Dawn of the Dead was worth. Sure, it's beloved by horror fans such as myself, but let's face it, with Walking Dead on the air, people go back and they watch Romero's original version, especially, I always talk about how, well, if you were born after or you grew up on Jurassic Park, it's hard to go back and watch, well, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms or any Ray Harryhausen monsters. The same, I think, is true of the original Dawn of the Dead. If you didn't grow up with it, if it didn't shock you with its hells a pop and violence when it first came out, it's hard, especially in the wake of the James Gunn written remake that Zack Snyder directed, which I've talked about before on the show. I was vehemently against this movie until I saw it and actually thought it was pretty good. But those real negative elements have never been allowed in the modern era to be transferred to HD. And eventually, Richard Rubenstein, cooler heads prevailed, and he has allowed the UK home video company that I really love, a boutique label called Second Sight. They put out that upgrade disc I showed you on the air. Do I have it sitting here? No, I think it's right behind me. But they do great work, really premium work. And I love Second Sight, and they have been granted access to all of the original negative elements, apparently, for not only Dawn of the Dead, but also George Romero's Martin, his vampire film that is, if you haven't seen Martin, it's one of the most unique and interesting vampire films ever made. It has a lot of verisimilitude in it, so if you haven't seen it, check it out. I really liked it, but there has been no date announced for the... There's no date announced for Dawn of the Dead, but let's check now. Maybe it's dropped. Let's go to the Second Sight website. I'm going to do that. Second Sight Films. I don't even know. Let's see. We'll go to Second Sight. Second Sight Films, the UK distributor of classic movies, limited editions, pre-orders, and latest releases. Wow. So they put out a pre-order. They have Revenge coming out. That movie Revenge, if you haven't seen it, I really like Revenge. Wow, The House That Dripped Blood. They put out Anna and the Apocalypse, which is right behind me. They put out The Invitation that I've shown. But they don't have anything about Dawn of the Dead here on their website. Yep. Ooh, they did a box set of World on a Wire. I didn't know they did that. I'll have to get that. That's cool. So yeah, there's no, it doesn't say anything. I don't see anything about, nope, there's no date. I think it's just going to be late 2020. I was hoping it would come out earlier. It is by far my most eagerly awaited physical media release of the year. I cannot stress how excited I am to get this, even though I've seen Dawn of the Dead 100 million times. I can't wait to get it. Willow sends in a tip. Hello, Willow. Everyone knows her. They love her. Our own Willow Yang, she of Pillow Talk. No, it's Willow Talk, I know. But I think between her and Vesna, there's a lot of Pillow Talk that goes on when we're not getting Willow Talk from her letters. So Willow says, with regards to the subject of ageism the other day, my parents enjoy seeing beautiful people on screen. My dad used to complain about George Clooney because he thinks he's too old to be getting lead roles. You know, what's, again, I was talking to a female friend of mine who was talking, about her age. Crazy to me. I mean, I guess because when I was growing up, I always liked, I found older women incredibly beautiful. I've always found that. Charlotte Rampling, how old is she? In her mid-70s? She's still hot. Come on. She's got a beauty and an elegance. We're all getting there. I don't understand ageism. I know people want to see young, beautiful people. I get it. I understand, but I've seen beautiful people of all shapes, sizes, colors, creeds, and ages. So maybe I just like people. But I understand that. I can understand, people wanting to see, that's what movies are all about. They're not about reality. They're about fantasy, and I get it. They always have been, and they always will be. Willow continues. She says, and we're a culture who value our elders, because, of course, she's Chinese. My parents were mortified by how stereotypical Westerners treat their parents. Why would you even have kids if they aren't going to take care of you when you grow old? Why, indeed? I've always thought that is sort of strange. I don't know why anybody would not be nice to their parents. I'm with you, Willow. That seems mean to me. That's mean. Mean. I think it's really mean. Anyway, you know what? I should probably put so you can see these questions. Dirty Nerdy sent a super chat in and says, "Hi Rob, just watched Upgrade. Fantastic movie. Thanks for the recommendation." That, of course, is Lee Whannell's film that he made before The Invisible Man. By the way, The Invisible Man did quite well this weekend. Let's see what Deadline has to say. It exceeded expectations, and it made a lot of money. Let's see what it says. The Invisible Man, 49 million in debut global sightings, which is crazy. Universal Blumhouse's The Invisible Man made its first appearance at the international box office this weekend, scaring up 20.2 million in 47 markets. Combined with the strong domestic start, the Lee Whannell directed pick debuted to 49.2 million globally on a $7 million spend. See, this is why Jason Blum is a great producer. Probably one of the great, I don't know him personally, and, this might come off as begging for a job. I'm not. I have no projects I've pitched to him ever, but their way of making films, $7 million, releasing them through Universal. This is an epic win. I'm sure this movie, it's a zeitgeist film. It's probably going to play for a long time. I mean, it's going to stay in the theaters, I think, for a while. I think people are going to go to it. It's got great word of mouth. But Upgrade was the movie he did first. But anyway, kudos to Lee Whannell and to Jason Blum for another hit. It shows that you can release a $7 million movie with a decent ad campaign. The trailers for it were great and still succeed at the box office. Felix Leiter sent in a tip and says, "Dearest High Chancellor of the Cyber Realm, out of Hitchcock's films, I've seen Rear Window, Vertigo, Psycho, North by Northwest, and To Catch a Thief. Vertigo being my favorite. What am I missing? Well, you haven't watched The Birds? The Trouble with Harry, Rope, his early movies like The Lady Vanishes and The 39 Steps. I love The Lady Vanishes, by the way. You got to watch all of Hitchcock's movies. I mean, his later movies like Family Plot and Frenzy might not be considered classic Hitch, but yeah, Marnie, got to look at Marnie. There's so many good ones, but yeah, those are obviously, you're at the top. Rear Window and Vertigo are my favorite Hitchcock films. Rear Window is my favorite, but you've done well. But yeah, go back and watch The Birds. Paul Gilmore sent in a tip and says, "Looked it up. Expanse costs $2 to $5 million, and an episode of Discovery is $8 to $10 million. Proof you don't need a high budget for compelling, great science fiction shows. Wake up, Paramount." Well, yeah, I mean, I have to say, I watched Discovery, and the sets are beautiful, but wow, even the lighting of those sets. And like every set has a window, which means you've got an effect shot. And they're always using holograms, which are more effect shots. There's ways to cut costs making Star Trek. And yeah, and I'll tell you, even though they're reporting that Discovery cost $8 to $10 million, the first season of Discovery was a lot more expensive than that. I can tell you that. But yeah, that's why I say that makes sense. I think The Expanse is one of the most well-produced TV, certainly science fiction shows, maybe ever, that we've ever seen. And think about it. They jump from Mars to Earth to the Belt to through the Ring. Even this season, The Expanse was switching up aspect ratios. I know Discovery and Picard have gone to a widescreen aspect ratio, which is great. That 4K aspect ratio, for those who are interested, is 4096 by 1716. That is what widescreen 4K, that's the official widescreen pixel aspect ratio. So it's great stuff. But yeah. Wayne Scotting sent in a super chat and says, "The worst thing serialized storytelling does in Trek is preclude the guest writer, e.g. Melinda Snodgrass with Measure of a Man, broaden the show's horizons." Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Look, Star Trek has, did I say Star Wars? Star Trek is an anthology show. It worked really well where you could have one story one week and have a completely different story the next week. And serialized storytelling, why I love it. I love the novelized aspects of it. There is something to be said about that, getting a new, unique story every week. And I don't think, not to rip on modern Star Trek, but I've seen no evidence yet. What we need in Star Trek is better writing and producing where they're not spending so much money. And all of those producers, my God. My God. Richard Green sends in a $5 super chat and says, Star Trek Continues is good Trek with lots less money. It's possible. Well, Star Trek Continues is a fan show. And one of the things about Star Trek Continues, yes, it was well produced. And I liked a lot of what Star Trek Continues was doing. And some of their episodes, I recently rewatched their final two-parter, which hark backs to Where No Man Has Gone Before, which I thought was pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, it's possible. But remember, it's not a good, you can't really compare apples and oranges like that, because it is apples and oranges, because Star Trek Continues was not a union production. So, it's a fan production. So the costs are not, you can't say they're the same. But I get what you mean. And, you're not wrong. But, it's not officially, it's not a, you're not dealing with a professional production. It was very professionally produced, but there are costs inherent in making things like that that Star Trek Continues did not have to deal with. So there you go. Let's see. I'm going to read letters. I've got some letters. This letter, there's a couple of good ones here. This is a Star Wars letter. This letter comes from Adam Blue, who's written in before. Adam Blue says, Hey, Rob, I don't know if you've heard much from the Star Wars game Jedi Fallen Order, but it has garnered positive reviews, sold as good as Electronic Arts would have hoped, and a new Star Wars game has already been announced to be released in 2021, but that could be the planned Star Wars Battlefront 3. The thing is, it's not really a good Star Wars game. Really? It is a great game, though. As much as I'm into filmmaking, most of my hobby time in the past has been very video game focused. And from playing so many video games through the year, I was disappointed when playing Jedi Fallen Order. How interesting. As I'm playing, I noticed it checked off all the required AAA action game boxes: third-person, open-world, collectibles, backtracking for collectibles, upgrades to help backtrack for collectibles. I could have just described Assassin's Creed, Watch Dogs, Just Cause, Grand Theft Auto, Dark Souls, etc. So what does Jedi Fallen Order have that no other game has that are set in the Star Wars universe? Does it have something that sets it apart from other games? No. There's nothing. Sure, your main character has a lightsaber, but it might as well be a sword. Even if lightsaber combat has never been done accurately, at least other games had elements in play to make it feel like Star Wars. But the video game industry is no different than the movie industry when it comes to IP. Have you heard of the issues with Star Wars video game development under Disney and EA? Sounds similar to all the production issues we hear about at Disney and Lucasfilm. When Star Wars Battlefront 2 first came out, it was so bad that EA and Disney confirmed their misstep and have since completely changed the game. This included removing all transactions that made playing as Darth Vader cost $100. This is how Star Wars is being treated, whether it is in films or video games, and the only consistent point between the game issues and the film issues is Disney. Jedi Fallen Order has been popular, and like Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, it's not incredibly offensive, but it's not what we'd expect from Star Wars and billions of dollars in support. I'm glad Star Wars Fallen Order is at least a great game. It's a great modern action game with a little Star Wars skin, but other than being a fun ride, Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker Fallen Order, but other than being a fun ride, Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker isn't really a well-made movie. It reminds me of the Colonial Marines game, and that was a bad game, but it was a good alien simulator for hardcore Aliens fans. But it was shown that the developer, Gearbox Software, bought the Aliens license, then paid a low wage to another company to slap something together. It's about saving money, and at the end of the day, I do not like that companies do this. Sometimes you praise Bob Iger, but I wouldn't. Nintendo, on the other hand, they tend to make long-term business decisions that put them on top. When the Wii U was unsuccessful before passing away from cancer, then President Satoru Iwata, along with the board of directors, took a pay cut in order to ensure quality is not affected. This practice has happened a number of times, and we've seen console manufacturers step out of the console race from bad console launches. I'm sure you're familiar with all this Star Wars negativity, which I certainly try not to dwell on, but it is interesting to compare it to the way the IP is being treated in the video game industry. Thanks for reading, Adam Blue. Well, Adam, what an interesting letter. I love video games. I don't have enough time to play anymore. Um, the last video game I played, it was Uncharted 4 and Grand Theft Auto 5, and that was what, 5 years ago? Maybe even longer. And I've dabbled in video games since then. I just haven't had time to play. I love modern video games. I used to love the Capcom games like Onimusha and Devil May Cry. I heard there's a new Devil May Cry game. I don't even have a PlayStation 4. I need to go ahead and get a PlayStation 4. Maybe I'll wait and get a PlayStation 5. But I'd like to get back into gaming because I feel I'm missing out. Ivan Maris says, "Hi, Rob and the entire Post-Geek Singularity. I watched you on the John Campea show today while you two talked about the newly announced Star Wars High Republic phase, or whatever that is, and you two mentioned something that got me thinking. Disney and Lucasfilm didn't have a plan for Star Wars movies. I'm always amazed how often we have a really bad and very short-term memory. Not intended to sound negative, just stating a fact that we all have sometimes. While I agree that the sequel trilogy ended on a low note, I really didn't like Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. I don't think the problem was in not having a plan. I'll try and break it into several points or facts. Fact number 1, Disney Lucasfilm did have a plan. This was obvious as soon as Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi came out. In Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, we had a blatant copy of Episode 4, A New Hope, something I found very jarring and didn't like very much. But as we had prequels as the last film before Star Wars The Force Awakens, it was necessary to make the film like that to capture the magic the original trilogy had, unlike the sour taste that the prequels left behind. And judging by the reaction and box office, they certainly succeeded. For the same reason, Star Wars The Last Jedi needed to be something completely new and different. Otherwise, it would just be a shameless copy and paste from the original trilogy, and what would be the point of that? We already had an original trilogy. We don't need another one. Now, you can love or hate Star Wars The Last Jedi. The fact is, they did what they intended to do, bring something new, fresh, and different to the franchise. Another indicator that Disney had a plan with the sequel trilogy lies in the fact that Star Wars The Force Awakens was clearly Han Solo-centric. Of course, in addition to the new cast, and Star Wars The Last Jedi was clearly Luke-centric. Yes, I understand all the complaints that we didn't get the trio together once again, but that doesn't mean they didn't have a plan. As a result, I have a strong belief that originally Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker was supposed to be heavily Leia-centric. Well, reading the Duel of the Fates script and reporting on it here, first, by the way, I can, absolutely, you're right. Leia played a central part in that script, and I think that really was the plan, focusing on each one of the three main characters. I still think it was problematic not to give those three characters a great send-off and a great final mission. Number 2, Carrie Fisher's passing shattered their plans. Everyone keeps saying that Trevorrow left because he didn't like Star Wars The Last Jedi, or he got into a fight with Disney over some agendas or whatever. Carrie Fisher passed away in December 2016. Several days later, Disney gave the announcement that they will not be recasting for the role of Leia, nor will they be using CGI to bring Carrie back to life, which basically meant either extremely limited Leia time in The Rise of Skywalker or no Leia at all. News about Trevorrow leaving Star Wars broke in September 2017, 9 months after Carrie's passing. If Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker was going to be Leia-centric, which again, I strongly believe it was going to be, my bet is that he was given some time to try and come up with a solution to the Leia problem. Now, we don't know what happened, and it is unlikely that we'll ever know, but there are many possibilities of what went wrong. Maybe he wanted to keep the film Leia-centric using CGI or recasting, which Disney refused, or probably he was given time to write a new screenplay for the film, one which Disney didn't like. Now, that doesn't mean Disney didn't like Colin Trevorrow. They probably liked his first draft treatment or whatever. I'm sure they would because it was quite good. They liked despite what Jenny Nicholson might say, they liked where he wanted to go with the film. It's just they didn't like his solution to the Leia issue, which is fine. Production companies are allowed to dislike a script. The problem here was that A, it's Star Wars, and B, it was an uncommon situation where one of the stars passed away before production started. You can't blame Disney for that. What you can blame Disney for is Fact 3, they became reactionary, opting for a course correction. After the Star Wars Last Jedi backlash, I was afraid that Disney will do what they ultimately ended up doing, trying to fix things by force and try not to please as many people as possible, and that was not possible at that point, not anymore. Fandom was divided into two large camps, and there was no way they could do anything to please both parties. Actually, they ended up not pleasing anyone. Star Wars The Last Jedi haters still didn't enjoy that film as much, even though they were happy to see some things corrected, and Star Wars The Last Jedi couldn't like the film, or couldn't be like the film that basically stabbed the film they liked in the back. In addition to that, they focused so much on getting things right, they forgot to make a good film. To summarize, while Disney could take the blame on some accounts, as they could have prevented some issues with the sequel trilogy, holding them accountable for not having a plan seems ridiculous to me. You can't plan your star dying of a heart attack. No, that's true. And you can't blame them that consequences of that death were stronger than it usually would have been. When Paul Walker died, he already shot a majority of the Fast and Furious 7 and was not in the middle of the trilogy that is about to begin shooting its last chapter within the following 12 months. And even if it was, the Fast and Furious franchise didn't have a continuous story like Star Wars does. It is a series of films, each of which can stand on their own. I repeat, this situation was something unusual and something we will probably not see again in a very long time. Disney was basically in a no-win situation, and they cannot be held accountable. Well, Ivan, what a thoughtful letter, but respectfully, sir, I disagree. First of all, I think you're right. I think that Colin Trevorrow's Duel of the Fates script was probably well liked at the studio, and after Carrie Fisher died, they were wondering, well, how the heck can we do that? Because she did play a pretty prominent role in that script. One of my favorite scenes in that script was when she actually goes to Lando, and it was her that recruited Lando and got Lando to help. And I liked all that. And it was her broadcasting throughout the galaxy with the help of R2 and 3PO and Rose, Tico, and Finn, her message, the ultimate Princess Leia hologram. I mean, I loved all of that. And I think that you're right. They probably had more of a plan than it appears that they did. I just think that the Rise of Skywalker script was really, really sloppy. And it really made no sense. And there's so many things in it. Light speed skipping, like jumping. I don't understand why J.J. Abrams, one of the things that J.J. Abrams does as a filmmaker, especially in his science fiction movies, is completely destroy verisimilitude with me with the way he uses spaceships. Whether he puts starships in underwater or building them on a planet as opposed to constructing them in orbit, or whether he uses light speed skipping when people suddenly come out of light speed in the middle of a planetary atmosphere in the middle of a city. I'm like, I don't believe that. Why are you doing that? That's not how light speed works. And it's funny for me to say that because I know you're all like, well, Rob, light speed isn't real. Well, flying through hyperspace ain't like dusting crops, boy. I mean, you have to plot your course on a Navicomputer. It's a very dangerous thing to do if you don't know what you're doing. And the idea that you could come out of hyperspace in a planetary atmosphere is absurd. But they kind of did that. They do that a lot in the J.J. Abrams verse. And it's annoying. I don't like it. It makes me feel bad. Our man Ian Samuels is here with another letter, but this is something that I've never seen, so I want to read this. This is our own Ian Samuels. You can tune in and read his Doctor Who reviews. I'm anxious to see if Ian Samuels has something to say about the final episode of this latest season of Doctor Who. Rob, I would like to talk detective series, in particular what I believe is the best detective series. Monk and Morris were good, but they didn't match up to the homicide hunter, Lieutenant Joe Kenda. One thing Kenda has over the others is that he is real. Each episode of the series has Joe Kenda himself doing voiceover and in an interview type situation discussing his view of the case. Add to this is a dramatization of the investigation. One of the interesting things about this series, other than being real, is the actor who plays Kenda in the dramatizations. Carl Marino was himself a detective before becoming an actor. Wow, so not a stretch of his acting skills. Well, I think our own Jim Boyers, man, let's put him in a series. He was a detective. Homicide Hunter is a great series with intriguing cases and the incredibly engaging Kenda telling us the tale. He even has a catchphrase that makes my wife wet every time he says it. Well, my. That's interesting. Well, tell your wife, my for me. And report back what happens. If any fellow members of the Post-Geek Singularity community follow Robservations, enjoy detective series, they should definitely check out Joe Kenda and Homicide Hunter. There's been 9 seasons since its start in 2011. Well, Mr. Samuels, I got to check that out. That's pretty awesome. And well, I want to hear how to say well, my to have the same effect on the ladies. Who doesn't? You know, I think that would be great. This is an interesting one. This one comes from uh, Vermilion Problems. Writes in and says, Robtronic Dub Sonic. Robtronic Dub Sonic. I like that. Hello. I first heard you speak so eloquently on science fiction while listening to Midnight's Edge. I can't possibly summarize all the details of verisimilitude and the state of Star Trek that you and others have done such a great job covering, so I will comment on my opinion of what feels like one of the biggest tragedies of New Trek and to a lesser extent, Old Trek. New Trek is weak. Tom Clancy fan fiction in Star Trek clothing. Wow. What ultimately is disappointing is the wasted opportunity to improve and update the original formula developed by Gene Roddenberry and nurtured by the stewards of the Star Trek IP who followed. Here I am, speaking specifically about Gene's vision of a utopian society and its explorations through outer space. One of the greatest and most challenging themes in Star Trek is its setting in a future of utopia, cosmopolitanism, social equality, and freedom. Old Trek did a good job in some places showing this. Even Star Trek Deep Space Nine, the quote Dark Trek, was still rooted in this general idea. We can see the showrunners and writers that would follow struggled with this concept all the way through to the end of Old Trek, even though one could argue that some of the best Star Trek was done after Gene's passing and covered topics he would object to. I can't help but feel that this was a missed opportunity. I believe, knowing or unknowing, it was the optimistic example that truly was the inspirational source of Trek's longevity, though the actions, characters, and effects are what are most often cited. I agree. So why do writers and producers shy away from the very thing that makes Star Trek unique? In some cases, I think they simply choose not to believe in Star Trek's vision or could not imagine it. Given all the negative examples we have in the real world, it's very easy to predict that such a future is impossible. But is it though? In the book Treknomics by economist Manu Sadia, he estimates that trending GDP will reach post-scarcity in roughly 250 years. Max Roser's ethnographic and archaeological evidence on violent deaths suggests the power of civilization has to curb violence, as the historical record shows that the homicide rate averaged over 50% during pre-civilization life. Wow. There is more. The biological effects of environmental pressure and how the negative can be swung toward the positive over the course of generations. All of this is to say that some form of post-scarcity society is, if not inevitable, very probable. I agree. I personally think that it was a failure of Star Trek to hand-wave the transition from our modern paradigm to the future one of Star Trek, wiping the slate clean by atomic war, a desperate humanity guided forward by pointy-eared space angels. That's interesting. Though, of course, the future is ours to lose. Some of the most curious issues I wonder about in a post-scarcity society are how we handle the following. The fear of death. One interesting item from Star Trek Picard is the book, The Tragic Sense of Life, that Rios is constantly reading. It's like the physical manifestation of doubt in Roddenberry's vision. The idea that the specter of death will haunt us no matter what world we build. It may well be true that we cannot banish this specter without all becoming monks dedicated to mental wellness. As such, we may always have some of the negative traits that we carry with us that psychologists hypothesize stem from our death fixation. It is here that Old Trek had some narrative successes and misses, where New Trek largely fumbles to say anything profound. Star Trek Discovery Season 2, especially with its half-baked religious concepts and demonic AI boogeymen, is all existential bark with no real bite. God damn, I love this letter. Overcoming loneliness and the problem of suicide, mass shootings, all problems that are rampant in first world societies. Addressing the schism between the secular and religious belief. In Gene's Star Trek, religion is something humanity simply grows out of. Can generations of being raised in a post-scarcity society with a value system that encourages wellness fill the place of religion and spiritualism? New Trek almost reversed this notion by nearly making Captain Pike a pious Christian. By the way, I heard that he was very much a Catholic and he was wearing a cross, and they cut that out. Navigating the perils of automation and all the way to post-scarcity. Who needs sentient AI? Automation alone could nearly be our undoing. The validity of economics has let much of the world fall through the cracks. Balancing automation with environmental sustainability while preserving jobs, at least as long as money is a thing, and dodging worldwide conflict is no easy matter. Almost makes the World War III story conceit forgivable, given how tricky it may be to hold the line until we can get a big enough pipeline from outer space while sustaining what we currently have on our planet. Of course, once you see the weight of evidence that humanity can address all these problems, we can begin to accept that our worst impulses are the exception and not the norm. Then we can get back to classic Gene Roddenberry storytelling. Humans, at their best, facing alien metaphors of our past and how we respond to them, and strange alien phenomenon and what it says about our place in the universe. New Trek doubles down on this misunderstanding or outright rejection of the Roddenberry model of Star Trek. Star Trek Discovery muddies the message, paying lip service to it at the end of Season 1 and taking a step back in Season 2. While the setup for Season 3 feels like an unearned attempt at a Star Trek apocalypse. Star Trek Picard also plays with unearned challenges of the Roddenberry ideals, and that makes Star Trek Discovery's irreverence so much smarter in Star Trek Picard also plays with unearned challenges of the Roddenberry ideals that make Star Trek Deep Space Nine's irreverence so much smarter in retrospect, because it was. Vermilion Problems. What a great letter, Vermilion Problems. Look, I really agree with you. I think one of the things that really bothers me about all modern Star Trek writing is it's so unimaginative. Really, they just pick your, we talk about, for a show that's supposed to be so woke, they've made the character of Raffi, a woman of color, a drunk, a drug addict, a deadbeat mother that lives in a trailer and is estranged from her kid. I mean, that to me is, that first of all, I think it's racist, and I don't usually say that kind of thing, but it is. And it's also wildly unimaginative. I mean, what is the 23rd century equivalent or 24th century equivalent of those kinds of things? You watch this stuff and I'm like, what show am I really watching? Why am I not showing? There's no science fiction concepts being dealt with in modern Star Trek. They're not doing anything very interesting on the show. You're watching things that can be almost on any show. It's not uniquely Star Trek anymore. And that's what I think you're absolutely right about is, this idea, I like that you called it a post-scarce world, the post-scarcity world that we live in. And that's key. And you're right. I mean, I think that's what really bothers me about modern Star Trek, aside from it's overproduced, but the stories are not good storytelling. Not really good at all. And they're half-baked science fiction concepts that they've been done so much better in other places. And that's what I find that sort of very distressing. And it's kind of a bummer. It's definitely a bummer to me, and I don't like it. I want to like it, but I don't. Why don't I? And it bums me out. Midnight's Edge After Dark sent in a super chat. Why, thank you, you guys. I have to say, for fellow YouTubers, that Midnight's Edge channel, between you and Andre and all these guys, Midnight's Edge says, gee, almost like I've heard this somewhere before. You might have. You might have had Vermilion Problems. Might be very familiar to both of us. Let's see. What else is here? I don't know if I read that. Well, Dean Mikitich wrote a letter again. I like Dean Mikitich's letters all the way from the UK. Dean writes, "Hi, Rob, in the Post-Geek Singularity. I wanted to ask you a question. When it comes to effects work in film and TV shows, what do you prefer, CGI or physical models?" Personally, I'm still rooted in physical models. Why do I feel this way? When you see any of the ships or space stations from Star Trek up to the mid-90s, or any ships from the original Star Wars trilogy, the ships from the Alien franchise or Blade Runner movies, or even the DeLorean and Time Train form in the Back to the Future movies, among any others, they feel like they're actually real. You can actually run your hand along the hull or even climb aboard them. I know they're in-scene real, as they are models, but when you see them on screen, it looks like someone actually built them, and they are working objects. Yes, the AT&T looks a little funny when it walks in Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, due to it being stop motion, but that effect has realism to it. I can see something of that size and weight walking clunky, or McClunky. Even with the vast improvements in CGI technology, when I see a ship on screen, it seems to be missing that physical element. I don't get the feeling I can reach out and touch it. I guess you can say it looks a little cartoony. This might also be because in some films and TV shows, when we're seeing a shot of a ship or other moving element, the camera moves in directions that are just not possible if it had been filmed in the real world. That's not to say I hate CGI. It has been used very well, but I think a mixture of the two could make ships look physical again while having stunning backdrops and action going back on in the scene. What do you and the Post-Geek Singularity think? Kind regards, Dean Mikitich. Well, Dean, let me tell you, I have a fetishistic attachment to spaceship models. As I look around the Robservatory, there are many spaceship models here of all shapes, sizes, colors, and creeds. I love my spaceships. I love spaceship models. As a kid, I can't tell you how many models of the Enterprise and Klingon battle cruisers and Romulan birds of prey that I built. It was a lot. A lot of Millennium Falcons all up in this hizzle. And I love spaceship models. But here's the thing. I like knowing that there's a model there, but you nailed it. It doesn't matter to me whether a model is it CG or is it a physical model. I don't mind. What I do mind, and you pointed it out, is how they shoot it, because we as human beings, consciously or subconsciously, we understand that movies are fake. We know it's all made up. All of it. It's all made up. Actors are seeing lines that are written for them. But the key is to, say it with me now, verisimilitude. The key is to create verisimilitude within the proscenium of the frame, of the screen. I mean, I know the proscenium, it's an arch. I'm using proscenium. I like the word proscenium in terms of movies. I know it's not exactly what it means, but I always think about it. The proscenium of the frame. What is in that frame? What are you looking at? And you want verisimilitude. You're trying to create reality. Well, one of the things that I really can't stand, and you nailed it, is when you have a virtual camera. When you're looking at something, when you're looking at a CG shot, there's a virtual camera. There's literally a virtual camera that is put in space. They can figure out what lens they're putting on it. There's an actual virtual camera. I know it doesn't exist, but that's where you're getting the scene is being shot from your virtual camera. One of the things I hate is when there are virtual camera moves that are impossible in real life, and if a virtual camera is moving too fast, and you can't do that, because that too, a lot of people don't get this, but if you have a live action movie with real people in it, and then you cut to an exterior shot of a space battle or something, you're going from one place where there's a real camera in place, and then you're coming out to where there's a virtual camera. If the virtual camera moves from a stylistic standpoint, if it moves way differently than what you shoot the live action with, it destroys the verisimilitude of the whole movie. So, and a lot of the time, when you saw a lot of this earlier, it's better now, because now there's a lot more previs and people know what they're getting. But one of the, Gareth Edwards, who directed Godzilla and also Rogue One, one of the things that I loved that he did with Godzilla was he always shot Godzilla with, in his mind, from the vantage point of where would a camera be. I mean, still they did some cool stuff, but I mean, whenever Godzilla was shot, it was like, okay, if this were real, we're only going to shoot Godzilla from a real camera perspective. So it created more verisimilitude, which I thought was a great idea. I'm like, that's really cool. So the thing about models is when you're shooting models, you're locked into the real world that you're shooting with. There is no virtual camera. You've got a real camera, and you're doing passes with models against green or blue screen, and sometimes the camera moves as well. And I like those shots. But when the virtual camera is used too much, I mean, Lord of the Rings there's a shot, most of Lord of the Rings I love dearly, but there's a shot when Saruman is on Isengard and he's rallying his troops and he says, "To war!" And the camera pulls down and past all of these orc heads. It's a cool shot, but obviously it's a virtual camera shot. You could never do that in real life with a camera, and I think it moves a little too fast. And while that shot's kind of badass at the time, I go back now and I watch it, I'm like, you know, and there's a lot of that in Lord of the Rings. By the way, I'm not slagging off on Lord of the Rings. I love Lord of the Rings, but I don't like you pointed out, I'm not digging. I don't dig those virtual camera shots. They bother me. They destroy verisimilitude, and it's sad, and I don't like that. So yeah, but I like this letter, and I like building spaceship models. And sometimes what's really cool is when you can build a spaceship model of a ship that only exists virtually on screen. That's the best. The Last King of Scotland sent in a super chat and says, thoughts on Berman throwing shade at Kurtzman Trek. Well, did he? Berman just asked how we all were enjoying Picard. You know what? If I was Rick Berman, I do not understand. If you, in our world today, who is the one person that knows more about producing Star Trek than anybody else on planet Earth? Rick Berman. Rick M&F Berman. Come on now. Why wouldn't you go to him? You know, it's incredible to me that they keep running through showrunners, that even season 2 of Discovery, the people that are making Star Trek are not experienced enough producers to keep the costs down. Rick Berman knew how. Why wouldn't you consult him about producing Star Trek? I don't know. And I think that's a big problem. And I thought it was pretty funny. I mean, I took the bait when he said that. I answered right away. And I don't know if he's so much throwing shade. Rick Berman was treated very shabbily because of Les Moonves. And I'll tell you the story. We couldn't put these on the documentaries, but Rick Berman told us that Les Moonves, this came from Rick Berman himself, wanted Scott Bakula replaced on Enterprise. That Enterprise was not doing as well as they'd hoped, and Les Moonves blamed Scott Bakula, and Rick Berman, he told Rick Berman to replace him. And you know what Rick Berman said? F you. Rick Berman stood up to Les Moonves, and rightfully so. I mean, I've met Scott Bakula. I've interviewed Scott Bakula when I was doing behind-the-scenes stuff for a movie called Geography Club. And I have met very few celebrities in Hollywood that are nicer than Mr. Bakula. And it's just insane. And Rick Berman stood up to that. So when Star Trek was finished, Les Moonves made it a point that none of Berman's new shows or any of their ideas would happen. So Berman just retired. And why not? Because he had some fat Star Trek money. And why put up with the aggravation? But the man knows more about producing Star Trek. Of course, my first call, if somebody said, Rob, your dreams come true. You're going to produce a Star Trek TV show. You can do whatever you want. My first call would be to Rick Berman, and I would hire him as a consultant, and I would pay him money, and I would prick his brain about what are the pitfalls, what are the things that we can expect, what can we do to keep the costs down, and all of that. Because why not? Why not? You know, we're recording some more Inglorious. I'm going to be on Inglorious Trexperts, and we're recording some episodes. By the way, Norman Lau, your discs are going to be autographed by the two of us. Just so you know, that's personal and confidential to Norman Lau if he's watching this. But yeah, I think that throwing shade to Kurtzman's Trek. Why wouldn't you? Berman was treated very shabbily. Look, I can't believe that nobody reached out to Melinda Snodgrass to tell her that Bruce Maddox, the character she created, was going to be used. I mean, they have no obligation to do that, but when you have, like, Melinda Snodgrass is still active. She's still writing books. She's still writing for TV. Why wasn't she contacted? Why to come back and write for Star Trek? I mean, I know they don't. It's a very, it's a very cliquey business. I get it. Kitty Cat sent in a tip and say, "Hey Roberto, just wanted to say that I love the show." Well, Kitty Cat, I would say I love your show, but I don't know if you have a show, or I'd love you, but I don't know if I've ever met you, so I probably can't say that, but I can definitely say thank you for supporting the show, and I appreciate the kind words. I found out yesterday that my friend Dave Hargrove, who I've known for 30 years, who I've talked about on the show, watches this show religiously at work when he's doing QC on like Netflix shows and stuff. And I'm like, all right, man, I appreciate it. He appreciates the discourse and he likes the letters. He actually specifically told me about all of your letters and how the letter writing, your letter writing art has gotten big. That you guys are doing a great job. By the way, I just remembered that somebody said I forgot to read their super chat, and from the other day, that I passed by it, and I'm gonna look and see if I did. And sorry, I'm zipping through here. Anthony Gonzalez, yes. Anthony Gonzalez sent me a super chat a couple days ago, and Anthony, I am sorry I passed by, but you did call me out. And I will read it. If I ever miss a super chat or a tip, please tell me. I don't want to be like a douche. You should get something for your generous contributions to the channel. And Anthony Gonzalez sent in a tip and said, "Do you want to see a guillotine in Piccadilly?" No. "I want to call that raggedy-ass Napoleon your king?" No. "Do you want your children to sing the Les Marseilles?" No. What is that from? I don't know. I don't know what that's from. But let me find out. Let me see if I can. I probably should know what that from. Am I missing out? Am I forgetting that that's probably a line from something like With Nail and I, and I'm just not getting it? I want to see a 17 in Piccadilly. Let's see. Let's see what I come up with. Don't you want to see? It is from. Master and Commander. Right. Oh my God, I gotta watch that again. I have to tell you, before I went on this show, there is a awesome Blu-ray of, and there's a DVD too, of Hans Zimmer playing in Prague. I don't know why this made me think of that, because I was thinking Gladiator, but I was listening to various tracks. I mean, Tina Guo, who's rocking the electric viol or electric cello, she's like the coolest woman on the planet Earth. And then Hans Zimmer, and it's so great. I was watching, it's like a rabbit hole. I watched Gladiator, they did Crimson Tide. I mean, I got to get that Blu-ray. I don't know. I know that doesn't mean anything, but I just thought I would say it because it's great. And Master and Commander, you know what? I got to rock that stuff. I haven't watched that in ages. I think I'm going to watch it. Master and Commanders, why can't they make a Star Trek movie like Master and Commander? Many people have said that it's like the most Star Trek movie of all. And I agree. It's so good. It's so good. This is interesting. Now, this letter comes from Sam O'Neill. I read this already, but I'm going to read it again. I'm going to read this letter again because I like it. "Hi, Rob. I get straight to the point. The other day, you answered my super chat about the impact Marvel movies have had on people who grew up with the MCU and how they impacted us. I'm 23, by the way, so I was 11 when Iron Man came out. You said the younger generation of fans are going to be a good bunch of folks." I did. "This got me thinking on my bike ride home from the gym, which is part of my usual Sunday morning routine. With so many movies, all the characters are shown with flaws, some more than others. However, they are still portrayed and seen as the perfect person we all want to grow up and be, whether you want to be like Cap or Iron Man or Superman or whoever. With kids growing up and seeing all these near-perfect beings on the big screen, so often I feel it has shaped many of us to grow up and be all-around good people. These movies and many others have taught us manners, respect, courage, compassion." I don't think I've read this letter before. "And the list goes on. I feel they have also taught us that we as humans make mistakes and sometimes do bad things. But however, that does not define who we are. We just pick ourselves back up and get our ass back in gear and continue to be the best version of us we can be. I've always loved watching TV or movies and looking at the hidden messages that they have in them. Hopefully, this letter makes sense. I was never good at putting my thoughts into words. Thank you, and this time, you have a better day. Much love from Brisbane, Australia. Sam O. Well, Sam, you know my love of your country has no bounds. I lived in Sydney while working on Superman Returns for almost a year. I love Australia. If somebody wants to give me another job on a movie in Australia, I will go. It's I love it so much. I love it down there. But thanks for that letter. I think that's great, and I hope so. I hope that's true. I hope that people I hope that people enjoy it. This next letter comes from our man Calvin Bowes in Portland. Dear Rob, Braxton and I have been watching Star Trek Picard. Braxton is 4. Have been watching Star Trek Picard, and even though Braxton is 4, he turned to me and asked a very profound question. Daddy, why does everyone hurt each other? They don't do that on all the other Star Trek shows. I thought about that, and you know, he's right. The producers try to say they're doing stuff that was never allowed before. Wow, that's somebody's next door. That's a big engine. The producers try to say that they're doing stuff that was never allowed before on the original show because of censorship. They should remember the line from Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. Just because you can do a thing does not mean you should do a thing. They made a bunch of Star Trek movies, and they did not feel they've had to have graphic violence, sex, and language. Remember when they made the first movie and did not have to bow down to standards and practices? Look what they did. They put out a G-rated movie. What makes me sad is that Star Trek was a show that the whole families watched together. Braxton needs to hear the messages that are in Star Trek. He liked how Starfleet always tried to help everyone and did not fight unless they had to. Instead, now we get heads cut off, people saying fuck and shit for no other reason but that they can. This is sad. Now understand, I am not a prude. I have no objection to language, violence, or nudity in a film so long as it serves the story. The producers and writers cannot tell me why any of this was necessary. Why can they not keep Star Trek as family fare? I hate to tell you, but fans like my son are needed for there to be a future for Star Trek. Star Trek Picard lost one viewer because Braxton doesn't like what they're doing. I'm not asking them to dumb it down and make a kiddie show, but please give us a Star Trek the whole family can watch. It's okay to have adult themes in Star Trek. They always did, but they were handled with taste. Instead, the producers now seem to say, hey, aren't we cool? We just said fuck and we cut a guy's head off. I do not understand their reasoning. Why do you not care about fans like Braxton? All of us old-time fans are dying off. You, Rob, became a fan of the show at the age Braxton is now. I think Star Trek would be dead today if back then it was a show that was inappropriate for a child to watch. Star Trek should be for the whole family. One last thing I will say to the producers. You show your lack of intelligence when you think you're being edgy just by saying fuck. What do you think, Rob? Calvin Bowles. Calvin, 100% right. I think that you're absolutely right. I think the current stewards of Star Trek are fucking idiots for having the kind of violence and the bad language that they have. I mean, they're also, like you said, they're uncreative. All of these storylines have ripped off other better things. There's been nothing, not one shred of an idea that has been remotely unique to modern Star Trek. Not one. It's all bad. And I'm not saying that if you like Star Trek, that's fine. There's going to be people that are coming to Star Trek for the very first time through Discovery and Picard. But I think that they are incredibly uncreative. And the fact that every time I hear a swear on Star Trek, I'm like, oh my God. I mean, it's like a kid who's 16 smoking cigarettes in this day and age. It's so like we're trying to be cool. Why? The whole thing about Star Trek is it should be timeless. People should not speak in colloquialisms. They should not say things like pro tip on Star Trek. It's so lame. It's such that just goes bad writing. Let's behead somebody, which makes no sense. You know, I mean, it's like, come on, read some Sun Tzu, dude. It's just bad. But you're absolutely right. The fact that kids can't watch Star Trek, Oh, but we're going to make an animated Star Trek for them. We're going to have Lower Decks and do a Nickelodeon show. Yeah, so lame. So lame. And I have friends that are working on Lower Decks or the Nickelodeon show. Friends that I really respect. And I hope they do something good. Because, yes, Mr. Bowles, I completely agree with you. The fact that your child would turn to you and say that proves to me beyond a shadow of a doubt what an epic failure modern Star Trek is. So epically fail. Fail. Epic fail. This letter, our man Mark Chure, who wrote probably the most controversial letter in history of this the show, is back. And this letter was actually sent prior to Bob Iger, his announcement of retiring. Dear Rob, it's been a while since I've written, so I thought I'd give some thoughts as to what I think is going on inside Lucasfilm, and this is just a theory. But first, we should go back to an age-old question. Is Kathleen Kennedy qualified to run the studio? I know she has one heck of a resume, but there's one other producer with an almost identical resume, her husband, Frank Marshall. Heck, even on E.T., while she was a producer, he was the production manager. So, is she really a great producer, or is he the great one and she just happens to make the meanest cup of coffee in Hollywood? If my last misogynistic comment upset you, fine. I don't believe it either. Nobody can hide their incompetence for 30 years, but leads me to my theory. What if we as fans and moviegoers are caught in a pissing contest between the most powerful woman in Hollywood, who has a chip on her shoulder for believing that nobody outside Spielberg, Lucas, and Marshall in Hollywood thinks she's capable, and the head of Disney, who actually does believe she's only good for a cup of coffee? Stuck in the middle, a property neither really understands, making it easier to weaponize. Normally, I would find such an idea ridiculous, but then Obi-Wan happened. It's been no secret that Iger has been very hands-on, many times seemingly going against her advice. There had been varied reports about Kennedy's involvement in The Mandalorian. Some state she was heavily involved, and others saying she was cut out of the loop and it became Iger's baby due to his streaming service. With the information available now, I think the latter. I see a scenario where Kathleen Kennedy is left out of much of the Mandalorian process and being upset about it. D23 rolls around and they not only announce the show, but also that the scripts were written. 5 months later, Obi-Wan is put on hold as there are script issues, the prevailing winds being the story was too similar to The Mandalorians. If I search for scenarios of how this could happen, I come up with two, both of which suggest she had little to do with The Mandalorian. The first is because she wasn't directly involved with The Mandalorian. She really didn't know about the similarities. The second, she did know the stories, and in the continued battle with Iger, held her tongue until after the Mandalorian broadcast, only then speaking up and claiming ignorance as a way to stick it to Iger. I don't begin to assume which. Either scenario shows a breakdown in management from both Iger and Kennedy. The latest episode in this drama, the Cassian Andor series, also has been put on hold due to script issues. The rumor behind this, nothing goes into production until Iger can find a way to have Kennedy retire. I realize my pissing contest theory has plenty of holes, but it has plenty of facts as well. In any case, I just wish the drama on the screen was half as good as the behind the scenes. I hate Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. While it may be the most interesting, it's also the one with the greatest logic holes and characters acting out of character to make a story work. Here's to hoping someday soon Lucasfilm will right the ship and my faith in my favorite franchise can be restored. Mark C. Mark, there's a lot of people that have been talking about Kathleen Kennedy and Bob Iger, and now Bob Iger is gone and Kathleen Kennedy is still there. I don't believe Kathleen Kennedy knows what's going on. I mean, remember, the only thing they have in production now is now The Mandalorian and whatever series they're going to make. Of course, Kathleen Kennedy reads the scripts. Of course, she's aware of what's going on. And, it is our dissatisfaction with Star Wars that is now, she's become, I think, our scapegoat, the scapegoat for fandom. And I think that again, there's been a lot of stuff that's gone on in Star Wars. I mean, it's tough. It's been a big risk. And I think Kathleen Kennedy was a fine choice to run Star Wars. That we've been getting deficient Star Wars, I don't necessarily think is just her fault. I think ultimately you have to put the blame more so on Disney. because what Disney wants is what they're getting. And Kathleen Kennedy is doing, I think, her best to give Disney everything that they've needed and everything that they've wanted. I just think it's tough, man. It is tough out there. Attic Hatch Sound sends in a tip and says, for those curious about movie score production, I recommend the YouTube channel Junkie XL. Film composer Thomas Holkenborg walks through the process in great detail, from sound design to working with musicians to post-production software editing. Well, Attic Hatch Sound, I didn't know that he had that channel. I love Junkie XL. I love his score to Fury Road. We talked about that on this channel. I mean, between Blade Runner 2049 and Fury Road, I'm constantly rocking the old Robservatory here, listening to those kinds of soundtracks, and that I love those. Journey's End sends in 2 very generous super chats and says, I never thought strict adherence to canon was necessary, but since 2009 Trek, it makes me wish a future showrunner employs one last bad time travel plot to retcon everything post-2005 Trek has done. And 2, where does a good Star Trek storyteller go from everything J.J. and Kurtzman has done? What can be salvaged of canon post-Discovery and Picard? Good questions. I mean, look, I'm a canonista. I grew up a canonista. I loved reading books about the Star Trek universe. I loved reading the Best of Trek anthologies, Star Trek Mysteries Solved that Leslie Thompson wrote. Half of the appeal to me of Star Trek is that it was a universe that existed beyond each show. You knew that there was a universe out there where stuff was going on. And when I was a kid, man, when another starship would show up, another Constitution. I mean, here's another great way to produce TV. They have one big model of the Enterprise, right? So this idea that, there are other Constitution-class starships, heavy cruisers in the Federation, so you can use that, you can use the model twice. And it was so great, like when you'd have the ultimate computer and you'd see 4 heavy cruisers come after the Enterprise, coming after that M5 during those ill-fated war games. You know, or you could find a ship in orbit, or in orbit around Omega, or you could see the Defiant disappear into the Tholian web. I mean, I loved all that stuff. It was so great. And Star Trek canon is something that only enhances the show. Like, I really, first of all, and I've said this so many times. When someone says to me, well, did you want the Star Trek show, do you want Discovery to look like the 60s? I mean, did you want your set design to look that way? Like it's cardboard? I'm like, first of all, what? But no, you could have absolutely made a canonically correct Star Trek Discovery and had all of the old designs. It could have all been redolent. And by the way, Brian Fuller was doing this. You have the costumes. You can still change them up, but they're still redolent of what they look like back then. All you have to really do is shoot it differently. Shoot it in widescreen with different lighting. I mean, it could absolutely look modern. Those designs, the bridge of the original Enterprise, aside from maybe the look of the buttons, which is a little weird, but, retrofuturism is cool. They could absolutely have done that. And it has hampered part of my enjoyment of when I'm watching Star Trek Discovery. I'm like, first of all, I can't get past, I hate all of the designs. I hate the costumes. I hate the ship designs. The ship designs, I understand the producers wanted those kinds of things, but my God, please, why'd you have to do that? You finally go back and cooler heads prevailed, and we can now have a D7 battle cruiser come back because those designs were awesome. But whatever. I love canon, and I don't know how you can fix that. I don't know. Because there are people that like Star Trek since Star Trek 09. There are people that do, and, they have to be allowed to like what they like, I guess. There's not much we can really do about that. But I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't know how you go back and do it. I find even Picard, we haven't seen one Federation starship. There's been no, I mean, the weird thing about, I think the writers at Star Trek, I was talking about this yesterday, you really needed to sit down and where there's been no Romulan ship. I mean, all this relocating, they act like the Romulan homeworld being destroyed means that there's no more Romulan starships, and yet we've got the Romulan reclamation plant. Okay, who's manning this thing? Those Borg cubes are gigantic. How can there be a hidden room? How can there be a hidden room in a Borg cube when you have the whole thing 3D mapped out? If there was a void that they didn't have it mapped out, then you would know that, oh, what's here? I mean, there's so many inconsistencies and ridiculousness that happens. That's one of the things that really bothers me. I mean, not even as a canonista, but, if you're talking about what if you've got a Borg cube, right? And you've got all these people running all over it with this reclamation project, you're asking me to believe that there's secret rooms that nobody knows about? It's so weird. I mean, with all the mapping technology, it's like in Prometheus when they've mapped out the entire alien base and you get lost in it. I can't stand when science fiction is dumb. I really can't. And there's a lot of canonical Star Trek things that modern Star Trek seems to gloss right over or change outright. This idea that beaming 40,000 light years. I mean, I know that it came from the Sicarians, and there is super transporter technology, the aliens that beamed Gary 7 to Earth. We know that was from a very long way away. But anyway, I don't know what you do. To answer your question, Journey's End, I don't know what you do. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to the end of Robservations, the show about something. Robservations, episode number 350. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank to everyone, all of you imagination connoisseurs who generously support me and this channel. Please like and please subscribe. If you like these chats, hit the little bell. So the analytics for the channel, it gets in everyone's rotations and all of that. And I very much appreciate that. I want to say thanks to my moderating staff. Of course, there's Detective Jim Boyers. There's the great and honorable Mayor Mike Bawden. There is the builder of a snowspeeder, a 1-to-1 scale snowspeeder from The Empire Strikes Back, Mr. Greg Smith, and of course, Louis Yu and Jordy Lyons, rounding out my moderating staff. And I want to thank most of all, again, them for just being rad. And I will say this, remember, as I sign off, you know what I always say. Remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, everybody, I bring Robservations, the show about something, episode number 350 to a close. I can't believe I just did episode 350. But thank you for being here on this journey with me. And as always, have a better day.